On Saturday, October 11th, 1924, bootlegger and safecracker Gerald Chapman picked the lock on the back door of the Davidson and Leventhal department store in New Britain, Connecticut. Once inside, Chapman made his way across the sales floor and entered a locked room by shaking the door loose. Inside the room were two safes. Chapman quickly began working on the first safe by drilling holes near the combination lock, filling the holes with cotton wads and nitroglycerin. He then inserted long fuses into the holes and lit them. Chapman took cover behind a heavy oak cabinet and tightly covered his ears with his hands. An explosion shook the room, and the door of the safe swung open. To his disappointment, the safe contained a handful of cash amounting to only $126. Chapman secured the measly sum into his briefcase and then swiftly moved on to the second safe. To his dismay, the second safe would prove much more difficult to crack. Reinforced with thick armor, this particular safe was advertised as being impossible to drill into. Believing he would need a second man to assist, Chapman left the building to summon his reluctant getaway driver named Walter Sheen. Sweating and shaking with fright upon learning of Chapman's difficulty with the second safe, Sheen pleaded with Chapman to abandon the robbery. Realizing that Sheen would be of little use to him, Chapman sent Sheen back out to the car with the briefcase of money. Chapman assured Sheen that if he could not crack the safe in 15 minutes, he would give up and leave. As Sheen left the building, he gripped the briefcase tightly and nervously crossed the street to the parked car. Sheen nervously opened the briefcase and was disgusted at the risk he was taking for such a small sum of money. Sheen stashed his gun and the $126 beneath the car's driver's seat. Then he walked away from the car in search of a restaurant where he could buy a cup of coffee. Hearing the explosion as Chapman attempted to open the second safe, a suspicious business owner sweeping an alley near the building called the department store's owner. The department store's owner then phoned the police to report two suspicious men spotted near his store and the loud noise from inside. The owner confirmed that the two men were not employees at his store because his employees never worked on Sundays. Within minutes, 5 policemen approached the building to investigate. 17-year veteran officer James Skelly entered the back door and immediately saw Chapman standing at the end of a short hallway. Officer Skelly shouted, "Police!" Chapman snarled, "Get down or I'll kill you." As Officer Skelly reached for his revolver, Chapman fired 3 shots, with one bullet striking Officer Skelly in the chest. Skelly fell backwards into the arms of Officer Clarence Lanfer, who was standing behind him. Chapman swiftly exited the building through the front entrance. Officer Lanfer instructed another officer to look after Officer Skelly as he ran after Chapman. Having a head start, Chapman was able to evade capture by climbing a fence and disappearing among clusters of neighborhood houses. However, Sheen was quickly apprehended, and the police initially believed that he was the lone burglar and gunman. The officers brought Sheen before the wounded Officer Skelly, who mistakenly identified Sheen as the man who shot him. Officer Skelly was taken to a hospital where he tragically died on the operating table. He was the first New Britain police officer to be shot and killed on the job. Prior to the passing of Officer Skelly, Sheen had repeatedly denied any involvement with the burglary and the shooting when questioned by police. Once police charged Sheen with murder, he came clean and told the police, "I didn't shoot that cop. Gerald Chapman did." Law enforcement officers up and down the East Coast began an intensive manhunt to find Chapman. A $500 reward was offered, and all potential leads were exhaustively pursued. On the run, Chapman traveled to the Midwest where he reunited with his criminal associates. Chapman's friends gave him a place to lay low as he waited for the heat from the search to diminish. Meanwhile, detectives searched getaway driver Sheen's business and uncovered a cache of guns and stolen goods. A box of fur coats contained a return address for a house located in Muncie, Indiana. Detectives in Muncie were notified, and they immediately staged a stakeout in a hotel across the street from the house. As luck would have it, Chapman was living at the same hotel, and detectives observed him visit the house across the street. One of the detectives tailed Chapman while the other stayed at the hotel waiting for reinforcements. Captain Puckett and another officer arrived within minutes, and they started searching the area. Spotting Chapman walking across the street, the cops pulled their car to the curb. As the 2 officers approached Chapman, They tried catching him off guard by asking the location of a certain doctor's office. Seeing through the trap, Chapman drew his pistol and fired a shot. The bullet missed the officers, and Captain Puckett punched Chapman in the mouth before he was quickly subdued. The officers found $5,000 cash, $3,000 in bonds, and 2 bottles of nitroglycerin for blowing safes within Chapman's suit pockets. Following a lengthy trial, Chapman was given the death sentence, but his execution would deviate from the conventional hanging method. The notorious Super Bandit would become the first criminal executed using Connecticut State Prison's cutting-edge hanging apparatus. With a noose encircling Chapman's neck and the simple pull of a lever, a heavy weight would plunge downward, abruptly snapping his neck and suspending him in midair. This execution served as the prison's most significant media spectacle to date due to the extensive nationwide reporting on Chapman's trial. Just days before the scheduled execution, a prison waiting room was repurposed to accommodate 8 telegraph operators, tasked with transmitting an anticipated 120,000 words of coverage about the impending hanging. Additional telegraph wires were installed to ensure that newspaper correspondents across the East and Midwest could instantly relay the particular details of Chapman's demise. On the evening of April 5th, a crowd of nearly 2,000 people congregated outside the Connecticut State Prison, eagerly anticipating Chapman's execution. Among the spectators was Chapman's sister, desperately seeking a final glimpse of her condemned brother, but her efforts were in vain. Just before midnight, approximately 30 witnesses were permitted into the death chamber to observe the impending spectacle. Half of them were journalists, while the other half consisted of police and prison authorities. 4 minutes after midnight on April 6th, Gerald Chapman, with his hands bound in front of him, stepped into the death chamber. He was accompanied by a priest and 2 prison guards. Witnesses noted that Chapman appeared to wear a faint smile and retained his composed demeanor as he scanned the observers, as though he were seeking someone, possibly his sister. The room remained eerily silent since Connecticut state regulations prohibited condemned men from making final statements. 2 guards approached Chapman from behind and secured his arms tightly against his body, while a third placed a black bag over his head. A noose was carefully positioned around his neck and properly adjusted. Upon receiving a nod from the deputy warden, the warden used his foot to push the lever, causing Gerald Chapman to be abruptly hoisted 12 feet into the air. Just 15 seconds after stepping into the room, the gentleman bandit was dead. The hanging machine's rope was gradually loosened, causing Chapman's lifeless form to sway gently back and forth for almost 9 minutes. When his body was lowered to the floor, 2 doctors approached and formally declared his death. His body was carefully positioned within a spacious wicker basket and taken to a nearby funeral home. 8 hours later, Chapman's legal representatives and his sister arrived at the funeral parlor, where they accompanied his remains to a nearby cemetery. To evade the prying eyes of reporters, the casket was discreetly carried out the back door and loaded into a van instead of a traditional hearse. While the burial pit was being prepared, the coffin was opened, allowing the mourners to share one last glimpse of their brother and friend, Gerald Chapman. Chapman's sister knelt beside the graveside as the simple casket was lowered into the earth. However, before she could bid her final farewell, an intrusive group of photographers abruptly intruded upon the scene. Overwhelmed with emotion, the bandit's sister screamed in anguish and fled from the site, racing towards a waiting car. In an effort to discourage the curious and morbidly intrigued, Chapman was buried in an unmarked grave. If you would like to hear more true crime stories like this one, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.